Security, who let him in here?
I'm a student. I'm performing tonight.
Performing? Are you delusional?
Headmaster Gerald Thornton. He looked Ashton up and down.
How dare you show your face here? You thick-skinned fool.
A scornful laugh.
That piano is worth more than all the wages your family has ever earned.
He stepped closer.
The only reason you're near that stage is because my son is sick. Just a black reserve. A nobody like you don't even think about touching it. You'll soil it.
Ashton stood still. Almost a whisper.
I just need the chair, sir.
Did you hear that?
No one heard him. They were too busy laughing. But after about 90 seconds, no one will be laughing anymore. But before that night, before the spotlight and the Steinway and the silence that swallowed 800 people whole, there was a different world. A quieter one. A harder one. South Side Chicago. Late November. The sky pressed down on the rooftops like a gray lid that never lifted. Wind cut through the blocks sideways, carrying the smell of frying oil from the corner store and the metallic tang of old radiators pushed past their limit. On Ashton Blake Street, half the porches sagged, half the streetlights worked. The bodega on the corner had steel bars over every window, and the owner kept a baseball bat behind the register. Not for sport. Ashton lived on the third floor of a brick walk-up with his grandmother, Doris Blake. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom with a faucet that dripped no matter how hard you twisted it. A kitchen table with a plastic floral tablecloth where he did homework every night under a single overhead bulb that buzzed if you didn't tap it twice. On the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like a cross, a photograph. A woman in her 20s, smiling wide, holding a baby boy against her chest. Lorraine Blake, Ashton's mother. She died of lupus complications when Ashton was 9. Not suddenly, slowly. The kind of dying that lets you watch but not stop it. Ashton remembered the hospital smell, the machines, the way her hand got lighter and lighter in his until one morning it wasn't there at all. His father? Gone before Ashton's first birthday. No forwarding address, no phone calls, no name worth mentioning. So it was Doris. It was always Doris. 71 years old. Retired hospital custodian. Hands that had scrubbed floors for 36 years, knuckles swollen past the point of straightening all the way. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and hummed hymns while she cooked, not because she was happy, but because silence reminded her of everyone who wasn't there anymore. Every weekday at 4:30 in the morning, before the sun, before the buses, before Ashton's alarm, Doris walked 6 blocks to a dry cleaner owned by a man who called her honey in a voice that meant nothing sweet. She ironed uniforms, dress shirts, slacks with creases sharp enough to satisfy people who would never know her name. She did this for one reason: Ashton's bus pass. $48 a month. That was the cost of getting her grandson from the South Side to the North Shore, 5 days a week, so he could attend a school that had never been built for someone like him. She never told Ashton what it cost her. Not the money, the body. The lower back that locked up by noon. The fingers that couldn't close around a pen some evenings. The mornings she stood at the ironing board whispering, "Just get through today, Doris. Just today." Her one luxury was a small clock radio on the kitchen counter, tuned to WFMT, Chicago's classical station. It played while she ironed, while she cooked, while she sat with her feet soaking in warm water. Ashton grew up in that sound. Mozart in the morning, Chopin after dinner, Debussy on Sunday afternoons when the light came through the kitchen window sideways and Doris closed her eyes and let the music carry her somewhere far from the 3rd floor of a walk-up on the South Side. He didn't know the composers' names, but he knew what the music did to his grandmother's face. The way her jaw unclenched, the way her breathing slowed, the way she looked, for a few minutes, like a woman who had never scrubbed a floor in her life. He wanted to make that sound. He was 10 years old when he found the piano. St. Ambrose Community Church, a brick building 2 blocks from the apartment, with a leaking roof and a fellowship hall that smelled like old coffee. Downstairs, a basement used for AA meetings on Tuesdays and youth group on Thursdays. Against the far wall, between a stack of folding chairs and a box of donated hymnals, a 1981 Yamaha upright, water-stained, one leg shimmed with cardboard, 3 keys dead in the upper register. The kind of piano nobody played because nobody thought it was worth playing. Ashton pressed a key during a church potluck, middle C. The sound was dull, slightly out of tune, and it went through him like electricity. Within a week, he was sneaking back after school. Within a month, he was staying until the janitor kicked him out. He taught himself by watching videos on a cracked phone, pausing, rewinding, placing fingers, failing, trying again. No sheet music, no theory, no teacher. Just his ears, his hands, and a stubbornness that bordered on obsession. For 2 years he played alone. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. Then Elaine Calloway heard him. A Sunday afternoon. Elaine was upstairs arranging hymnals. Through the floorboards, faint but unmistakable, someone was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. Not perfectly, but with something perfection can't teach. She stood there for 11 minutes. Then she walked downstairs. Elaine Calloway, 62, black, retired concert pianist. She'd performed at Carnegie Hall twice, toured Europe in her 30s before arthritis quietly stole her career one finger at a time. Now she volunteered at St. Ambrose and tried not to think about the stages she'd never stand on again. She sat on the folding chair next to the piano. Ashton froze, both hands still on the keys, looking at her like a kid caught stealing. She didn't clap, didn't gush. She said, "Who taught you that?" "Nobody." She closed her eyes, nodded slowly, the way you nod when you've confirmed something you were afraid to believe. "You have the thing that can't be taught," she said. "Everything else, we can fix." From that day, Elaine taught Ashton 3 afternoons a week, for free. Theory, technique, interpretation, how to breathe with a phrase, how to let silence do the work. She gave him her collection of sheet music and watched him devour it the way a starving person eats. 6 years. That's how long Elaine poured into him. 6 years of a woman who had lost her own stage, building one for a boy the world wasn't watching. It was Elaine who made him apply to Hargrove Academy. "You're ready," she told him. "That school isn't ready for you, but you're ready." The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. Ashton read it at the kitchen table, under the buzzing light, while Doris stood behind him with her hand on his shoulder, squeezing once, hard, because she didn't trust her voice. Full ride, tuition covered. But uniforms, materials, transportation, that was on them. That was when Doris started ironing at 4:30 in the morning. If Ashton failed, if he lost this scholarship, it wouldn't just be his future that crumbled. It would be 4 years of his grandmother's body breaking at an ironing board, 4 years of Elaine's faith, 4 years of a dead woman's son trying to become something that mattered. He couldn't lose this. He wouldn't. But Hargrove Academy had its own plans for boys like Ashton Blake. Hargrove Academy sat on 12 acres of manicured land on the North Shore. Iron gates, limestone buildings, ivy climbing walls that had stood since 1902. The kind of place where the hedges were trimmed sharper than the students' minds. Where the donor wall in the main hall stretched 40 feet long, brass nameplates polished every Monday morning by a cleaning crew that entered through the back. Ashton entered through the back too. His first day. Nobody told him to. He just saw the other scholarship students doing it and understood. The front entrance, glass doors, marble foyer, a portrait of the founder in oil. That was for the families who wrote checks. The ones whose last names matched the nameplates. The ones whose grandfathers shook hands with the men who built this place. Gerald Thornton's grandfather was one of those men. 3rd generation. That's what Gerald was. Not self-made, not earned, inherited. The way you inherit a house, a trust fund, or the quiet assumption that the world arranges itself around your comfort. He had run Hargrove for 14 years. Silver hair swept back, suits tailored in Connecticut, a handshake firm enough to remind you who was in charge. His office smelled like leather and old money, mahogany desk, oil portraits of predecessors on the walls, a framed photograph with a former governor on the shelf behind his chair. He approved the diversity scholarship program 3 years before Ashton arrived. Not because he believed in it, because the board demanded it. Donors wanted optics. Parents wanted to feel progressive at cocktail parties. Gerald gave them what they wanted: 5 full-ride scholarships a year for students from underserved communities, a press release, a photo opportunity, a line item on the annual report. But making room? Actually making room? That was never part of the deal. Gerald didn't use slurs. He didn't need to. He had something more efficient, a politeness so precise it cut deeper than any insult. He called Ashton young man for 3 semesters before learning his name. He redirected conversations when Ashton approached groups of legacy students in the hallway. Not rudely, just smoothly, the way you steer someone away from a door they're not supposed to open. In faculty meetings, he referred to scholarship students as our outreach cohort, not students. A cohort, a category, a statistic in a report he presented once a year to feel generous. When Ashton passed him in the corridor, Gerald's eyes moved through him. Not over him, through him, as if Ashton were made of glass, as if acknowledging his presence would cost something Gerald wasn't willing to spend. 4 years. 4 years of being looked through by a man who controlled every stage, every opportunity, every door in the building. And then there was Preston. Preston Thornton, Gerald's son, 17. Sandy hair, pressed khakis, a watch worth more than Doris Blake's annual ironing income. He had studied piano since age 5, private instructors at home, summer intensives at Tanglewood, a Bosendorfer grand in the family living room that nobody else was allowed to touch. Preston was good, technically proficient. His scales were clean, his posture textbook, his dynamics carefully rehearsed. But something was missing. The thing Elaine described as the difference between someone who plays the notes and someone the notes play through. Preston performed music. He didn't feel it. He executed Chopin the way a court reporter transcribes testimony. Accurate, complete, and entirely without soul. Gerald had already arranged everything. The winter showcase, Hargrove's crown jewel, the concert that donors flew in for, that alumni circled on their calendars a year in advance, would feature Preston performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The centerpiece, the finale. Not an audition, not a competition, a coronation. Gerald's son, on Gerald's stage, confirming Gerald's legacy. The program was printed, the seating was assigned, the Steinway was tuned. Nobody asked Ashton if he wanted to play. Nobody asked what he could play. Nobody asked him anything at all. But here's what Gerald didn't know. What he would have known if he'd ever once stopped walking past that practice room on the 3rd floor. One evening, months before the showcase, Gerald passed the room after hours. The hallway was empty. Through the closed door, muffled but unmistakable, someone was playing the ballade. Not stumbling through it, playing it. The runs were fluid. The phrasing was mature. The sound had weight. Gerald stopped. His hand hovered near the door handle. For 1/2 second, something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe. Recognition. Maybe even the faintest edge of fear. Then he straightened his cufflinks and kept walking. He didn't open the door. He didn't ask who was inside, because knowing would have cost him the one thing Gerald Thornton protected above all else, the comfortable belief that boys like Ashton Blake didn't belong at that piano. And that belief was about to be shattered in front of 800 people. The night of the winter showcase arrived the way important nights always do. Slowly at first, then all at once. By 6 o'clock, the parking lot was full. Black sedans, European SUVs. The auditorium lobby smelled like expensive perfume and fresh flowers arranged by a florist who charged more per centerpiece than Doris Blake earned in a week. 800 seats. Velvet cushions, crystal chandeliers dimmed to a warm gold. A printed program on every chair, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the Hargrove crest in the corner. Page 4. Preston Thornton, Chopin's Ballade Number 1 in G minor, the finale, the crown jewel. And in the front row, Vivian Alcott, Juilliard faculty, concert pianist, the kind of name that made music directors sit straighter and students forget how to breathe. She sat with her legs crossed, reviewing the program with the calm of a woman who had heard 10,000 performances and remembered maybe 12. Her presence meant something. Everyone in that room knew it. A nod from Vivian Alcott could open doors that no audition tape, no recommendation letter, no amount of money could unlock. Gerald Thornton knew it most of all. Tonight was supposed to be Preston's night, Preston's moment. The moment Gerald had been engineering since his son first touched a piano at age 5. Backstage, 32 minutes before curtain. Preston sat on a folding chair, hands between his knees, staring at the floor. His face was the color of wet paper. His fingers trembled. A music teacher leaned over him, speaking softly, but Preston shook his head. Again. Again. Then he stood up, walked to the bathroom, and threw up. He came back wiping his mouth with the back of his hand and said the words that would change everything. I can't do it. I can't go out there. Gerald's face went from concern to something harder, something between disappointment and fury. He grabbed Preston's arm, pulled him aside, voice sharp. You will not embarrass this family. Not tonight. Not in front of her. Preston pulled his arm free. I said I can't. Silence. The backstage crew froze. A stagehand pretended to adjust a cable. A parent volunteer looked at her shoes. Gerald straightened his jacket, scanned the room. His mind already calculating. Not the music, not the art, but the optics. An empty slot in front of Vivian Alcott. An empty Steinway under the spotlight. 800 people waiting. That's when a music teacher, Mrs. Hadley, quiet, mid-50s, the kind of teacher nobody thanked at galas, stepped forward and said, almost apologetically, the Blake boy can play it. I've heard him practicing the ballade multiple times. He knows it. Gerald turned to her. The look on his face. You would have thought she suggested letting a stray dog on stage. Blake? He almost laughed. The scholarship kid? He can play it, sir. I've heard him. Gerald looked at the stage door, then at the clock, then at the empty chair where Preston had been sitting. He didn't say yes because he believed. He said yes because he had no other option. And that difference, that ugly, honest difference, was written all over his face. He found Ashton in the hallway. The boy was in his borrowed blazer, standing near the back exit like someone who had already accepted he wouldn't be needed tonight. Gerald walked up to him with 2 parent volunteers trailing behind, and what followed was not a conversation. It was a sentencing. All right, listen. My son is unwell. You're going to fill his slot. Ashton blinked. The ballad? Don't make me repeat myself. Gerald looked him over. The blazer, the shoes, the skin, and his lip curled. You're the only body available. That's the only reason you're standing here. Don't confuse this with an opportunity. A volunteer behind Gerald muttered, just loud enough. I hope he at least washed his hands. Gerald didn't correct her. He didn't even flinch. If you embarrass this school in front of Vivian Alcott, Gerald said, leaning close, I will personally make sure you never set foot in this building again, scholarship or not. Ashton held his gaze, said nothing. Gerald turned and walked away. The volunteers followed. One of them glanced back at Ashton and shook her head, the kind of headshake reserved for lost causes and bad decisions. So here's the question. If you were Ashton, right now, in this hallway, with those words still ringing in your ears, would you walk onto that stage? Or would you walk out the back door and never come back? Ashton stood alone in the hallway. The fluorescent light above him buzzed, the same frequency as the bulb in his grandmother's kitchen. The sound of the auditorium leaked through the walls. 800 people settling into velvet seats, programs rustling, low laughter, the polite murmur of people who had never once doubted their right to be in a room. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, not from nerves, from something older, something that had been building for 4 years. Every hallway where eyes slid past him, every group conversation that closed when he approached, every time Gerald Thornton called him young man, because learning his name would mean admitting he existed. 4 years of being invisible in a building his grandmother bled for. He thought about walking away. The back exit was right there. 15 steps, a push bar, and the cold November air. He could disappear. Nobody would chase him. Nobody would even notice. They'd find another solution, or leave the slot empty. Either way, by Monday, Gerald would have a new story. The scholarship kid who couldn't handle the pressure. The charity case who folded. And that story would follow him. Not because it was true, but because it was convenient. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and in the silence, he heard it. Not the auditorium, not the murmurs, but his grandmother's clock radio. WFMT. Chopin floating through a small kitchen on the south side, while Doris ironed before dawn. The smell of starch and steam. The way her shoulders dropped when the music hit the right phrase. The way she closed her eyes like she was somewhere else, somewhere that didn't hurt. He opened his eyes and pulled out his phone. One text from Doris, sent an hour ago. Praying for you tonight, baby. Whatever happens, you already made me proud. He read it once, read it again, then a third time, slower, letting each word land. He put the phone back in his pocket. He thought about Elaine, the folding chair next to the Yamaha, the 11 minutes she stood listening through the floorboards before she came downstairs. The way she nodded, slow, certain, and said, "You have the thing that can't be taught." 6 years of Elaine's faith, 8 years of his own hands on broken keys, 71 years of a grandmother who never once stopped believing he was worth the cost. He buttoned the blazer, straightened the collar, took one long breath. Then he turned and walked toward the stage door. Not fast, not slow. The walk of someone who had already decided not to prove them wrong, but to prove Doris and Elaine right. The stage door opened, and the light hit him like a wall. Warm, gold. A single spotlight aimed at the Steinway Grand sitting in the center of the stage like a black cathedral. Its lid was raised, lacquer gleaming, the strings inside visible like the ribs of something alive. 9 feet of German engineering, a piano worth more than the apartment building Ashton grew up in. He stepped out. The auditorium shifted. 800 heads turned. Programs rustled as people checked the name, then checked again. The embossed print said Preston Thornton. The boy walking across the stage was not Preston Thornton. Whispers started in the front row and rippled backward like wind through tall grass. Who is that? Is that a scholarship student? They're letting him play? Oh, come on. This is the finale slot. A woman in the third row leaned to her husband and whispered something behind her program. He glanced at the stage, frowned, and shook his head. Behind them, a man in a bow tie exhaled through his nose, the particular sigh of someone watching standards decline in real time. A mother 2 rows back pulled out her phone, ready to record what she assumed would be a brief, uncomfortable mistake. Nobody in that room expected to hear music. They expected to witness a disaster, and most of them, if they were being honest, were almost looking forward to it, because it would confirm what they already believed, that some people belong at certain pianos, and some people don't. In the front row, Vivian Alcott uncrossed her legs. She didn't whisper. She didn't check the program. She watched. Ashton crossed the stage. Each footstep sounded clear against the hardwood, deliberate, unhurried, the only sound in a room of 800 people holding its breath for the wrong reasons. Most of them weren't holding their breath in anticipation. They were holding it the way you hold your breath before a car crash. He reached the piano. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He pulled out the bench. The legs scraped faintly against the stage floor, a sound that, in the silence, felt enormous. He sat down, adjusted the height, 1 notch lower. His hands rested on his thighs, palms down, fingers still. He closed his eyes. In the wings, Gerald Thornton stood with his arms crossed, jaw set, watching with the expression of a man who had already written the ending. Behind him, two parent volunteers exchanged a look. One of them, the woman who had told Ashton not to touch anything, smirked and mouthed to the other, "This should be quick." 3 seconds passed. 3 seconds of nothing. The creak of a seat in the 5th row. The faint electrical hum of the stage lights. The distant click of a camera somewhere in the balcony. Ashton's chest rose, fell, rose again. The auditorium waited. Not patiently, impatiently. The way you wait for someone to fail so you can confirm what you already believed. Then his left hand lifted. One finger descended. The opening note of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. A single G, placed into the silence like a stone dropped into still water. It spread outward through the auditorium, filling every corner, reaching every seat, touching every ear. And it was not what they expected. It was not thin, not tentative, not the fumbling first note of a boy in over his head. It was full, deep, resonant, aching in its precision, the kind of note that doesn't just sound right but feels absolutely right, the way a key fits a lock it was made for. Several people in the first 5 rows shifted in their seats. The woman who had smirked in the wings stopped smirking. Gerald uncrossed his arms. Ashton's right hand joined the left. The melody unfolded, the lyrical opening of the ballade, one of the most heartbreaking passages Chopin ever wrote. And Ashton played it the way you speak to someone you've lost, quietly, carefully, as if the notes were fragile and the silence between them was sacred. His fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness that made no sense for hands that had learned on broken ivories in a church basement. Every phrase breathed. Every pause held weight. He wasn't performing the music. He was remembering through it. His mother's hand growing lighter in his. His grandmother's face when the radio played Chopin in the kitchen. The damp basement where he first discovered that sound could carry the things words couldn't. A woman in the 3rd row, the one who had whispered behind her program, put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet, and she didn't know why. In the back row, in a seat she had chosen because she didn't want to be seen, Elaine Calloway gripped the armrest of her chair with both hands. Her arthritic fingers turned white around the velvet. She hadn't told Ashton she was coming. She just came. And now she sat perfectly still, barely breathing, listening to the sound of 6 years of her life pouring through a boy's hands and into a room that had never deserved to hear it. The ballad shifted. The lyrical section gave way to the development, more complex, more demanding. Runs that climbed and fell like staircases in a burning building. Chord progressions that required hands to stretch, leap, land precisely. Ashton's posture changed. His shoulders dropped. His spine lengthened. The tension in his jaw, the tension he had carried through 4 years of hallways and silence and being looked through, began to dissolve. Not because he forgot it, because he was using it. Every slight, every snub, every time Gerald Thornton's eyes passed through him like glass, he fed it into the keys. He turned 4 years of invisibility into sound. The runs were clean. Not just clean, effortless. Passages that Preston Thornton had rehearsed for months with private instructors and metronomes, Ashton navigated with a fluidity that came from 8 years on a broken Yamaha, where 3 keys didn't work, and you had to rearrange your fingering on the fly every single time, or the music stopped. He had learned to adapt before he learned to read a staff, and now, on a Steinway that responded to every whisper of his touch, he wasn't adapting. He was flying. The audience leaned forward. Not one person, not a few. The entire auditorium shifted, a collective unconscious movement, like a tide pulling toward the stage. The whispers had stopped. The program sat forgotten on laps. The woman in the 3rd row hadn't moved her hand from her mouth. A donor in the 2nd row, a man who had written a 6-figure check to Hargrove that evening, sat with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the stage, his expression completely still. He had funded Preston's summer program at Tanglewood. He had shaken Gerald's hand an hour ago and told him how proud he must be of his son. Now he was watching a boy he'd never heard of play with more depth in 2 minutes than he had heard in 2 decades of Hargrove showcases. In the wings, Gerald Thornton was no longer watching with crossed arms. His arms hung at his sides. His lips were slightly parted. The smirk that had lived on his face since he told Ashton not to touch the piano, it was gone. In its place, nothing. A blank. The face of a man whose script was being rewritten in real time, and he couldn't find his lines. The ballad reached its storm. The climactic section, the passage that separates students from artists, technicians from musicians. Crashing octaves, cascading arpeggios that tumbled down the keyboard like water over rock. The volume swelled until the Steinway's voice filled the auditorium the way a cathedral organ fills a nave, not just heard, but felt, in the chest, in the teeth, in the bones. Ashton's forearms were taut. Sweat appeared at his temples. His breath synced with the phrasing. Inhale on the ascent, exhale on the fall. His entire body becoming an instrument inside the instrument. He wasn't playing the piano anymore. The piano was playing through him. His hands moved with a violence and precision that shouldn't coexist, striking the keys hard enough to shake the frame, yet landing each note exactly where it needed to be, not a millimeter off, not a millisecond late. The mother who had pulled out her phone to record a disaster had forgotten she was recording. The screen shook in her hand. She was crying. She didn't know when she started. A man in the 4th row, silver-haired, retired, the type who attended these events out of obligation, had tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them. He didn't seem to know they were there. Beside him, his wife gripped his forearm and neither of them moved. Vivian Alcott leaned forward in the front row. She removed her glasses slowly and set them on her knee. In the world of classical music, Vivian Alcott removing her glasses meant one thing. She had stopped evaluating. She was no longer judging a performance. She was witnessing something. 2 seats away, another faculty guest turned to the person beside her and mouthed a single word. The word was, "Who?" The storm peaked. The final fortissimo chord rang out. Enormous, defiant, the sound of a door being kicked open. And then, without warning, the music dropped. Silence. And into that silence, the ballade's coda began. The opening theme returned. The same melody, the same key. But everything had changed. The notes that had been tender at the beginning were now devastated, carrying the weight of everything that had come between then and now. Ashton played the final passage with a softness that made the massive auditorium shrink. The chandeliers, the velvet, the 800 people, all of it fell away. The room felt small, intimate. Like a kitchen on the south side, with a clock radio playing Chopin, while an old woman ironed in the dark. His fingers slowed. The last phrase floated upward, fragile, aching, barely there. The final chord. His hands stayed on the keys. His fingers rested on the ivories as if saying goodbye to something. His eyes were still closed. And then, nothing. No sound, no movement, no breath. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then 4. Then 5. The stage lights hummed. A chandelier crystal swayed imperceptibly. Somewhere in the balcony, a woman pressed both hands flat against her chest, as if holding something inside from escaping. Ashton's hands lifted from the keys. He placed them in his lap. He opened his eyes. The silence held for one more long heartbeat. And then it broke. One person stood first. A man near the back. Nobody important. Nobody whose name was on a brass plate. He just stood, the way you stand when sitting feels like a lie. Then the woman beside him. Then an entire row. Then 3 more. The applause didn't start politely. It erupted, from the chest, from the gut, from that place where emotion lives before the brain has time to organize it. It wasn't the rehearsed, gloved clapping that usually filled this auditorium. It was raw, uncontrolled. The sound of 800 people realizing they had just witnessed something they would tell their children about. The entire auditorium rose. Every seat, every row, balcony included. The woman in the third row, the one who had whispered behind her program, the one who hadn't lowered her hand from her mouth since the first minute, was sobbing now. Not quietly, not discreetly. The kind of crying that doesn't care who's watching. The donor in the second row, the one who had funded Preston's summers at Tanglewood, stood and applauded with his hands above his head. The mother who had pulled out her phone to record a disaster looked down and realized she had recorded something else entirely. The man in the bow tie who had sighed when Ashton walked on stage? He was on his feet, clapping harder than anyone in his row. Ashton sat at the bench. He didn't stand. He didn't bow. He looked out at the wall of faces, the standing bodies, the open mouths, the tears, the hands beating together. And for the first time in 4 years at Hargrove Academy, he was not invisible. He didn't smile. He breathed. In the front row, Vivian Alcott stood. She held her glasses in one hand, still at her side. She looked at Ashton for a long moment, the kind of look that measures not just what someone has done, but what they're capable of becoming. Then she did something that made every music faculty member in the room stop breathing. She walked to the stage. Not to the wings, not to Gerald, not to the program committee. Directly to the stage. She climbed the 3 short steps, crossed the hardwood, and extended her right hand to an 18-year-old boy from the south side of Chicago who was still sitting at a piano that someone had told him he would stain by breathing on it. In the classical music world, this gesture is not casual. It is not a handshake. It is the acknowledgement of an equal. It says, "I have heard you, and you belong here." Ashton looked at her hand, then at her face. He stood and took it. The applause doubled. In the wings, Gerald Thornton had not moved. His arms were at his sides. His face held no expression. Not anger, not shame, not the theatrical villainy of a man caught in a lie. Something worse, something quieter. The slow, grinding recognition that he had been wrong. Not privately wrong, not wrong in a way he could rewrite over cocktails. Wrong in front of 800 witnesses, a Juilliard professor, and every board member who controlled his future. He straightened his tie. The old reflex. But for the first time in 14 years, the gesture gave him nothing. No armor, no authority, no comfort. A board member standing 3 feet away glanced at Gerald. The look on her face had shifted, from deference to something colder. Reassessment. The beginning of a question Gerald would not be able to answer. Ashton walked off stage. The applause continued behind him, wave after wave, refusing to stop. He passed through the wings. Gerald was right there, 2 feet away. Ashton stopped, not dramatically, not with fury. He turned to Gerald the way you turn to someone who no longer matters enough to be angry at. Quietly, without malice, without performance. "I didn't need your permission. I just needed the piano." He walked on. Gerald said nothing. There was nothing left to say, not a single word. Backstage was a blur of bodies and noise. Students crowded the hallway. Staff members spoke over each other. Someone was crying. Someone was laughing. A stagehand who had watched the entire performance from the wings shook Ashton's hand without saying a word, just gripped it, nodded, and walked away. Then the crowd parted, and Elaine Calloway was standing there. She didn't rush. She didn't run. She walked toward him the way she had walked down those church basement stairs 6 years ago. Steady, certain, already knowing what she'd find. She placed both hands on his shoulders, looked at his face. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She had done all her crying in the back row where nobody could see. She didn't say, "That was beautiful." She didn't say, "I'm so proud." She said what mattered. "Now they know what I've always known." Ashton's chin trembled. For the first time all night, not during the insults, Not during the walk to the stage. Not during the ballade. His composure cracked. Just for a second. Just enough for Elaine to see the boy he still was underneath everything he'd just proven. She squeezed his shoulders once. Hard. The same way Doris squeezed. Then she stepped aside because someone else was waiting. Vivian Alcott stood 3 feet away. She had come backstage through the side entrance, bypassing Gerald, bypassing the program committee, bypassing every protocol. She came directly. Ashton Blake. She said his name like she was filing it somewhere permanent. Vivian Alcott, Juilliard. I know who you are. Then you know I don't come backstage. She produced a business card, plain white, black text, and extended it. I want you to audition for the undergraduate program. Full scholarship. I'll write the recommendation personally. Ashton took the card. What you did tonight wasn't a performance, Vivian said. It was a statement. She nodded once to Elaine, one musician acknowledging another's work, 6 years of invisible labor recognized in a single glance, and left. Then he went to find his grandmother. Doris was in the lobby. She hadn't been in the auditorium. Her ticket was for the overflow area, where the performance was piped through ceiling speakers. She sat on a wooden bench near the coat check, wearing her best dress, navy blue, buttoned to the collar, the one she kept in plastic at the back of the closet for occasions that almost never came. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her purse sat beside her, unopened. Her eyes were closed, and tears ran down both cheeks in slow, steady lines, the kind of crying that doesn't make noise because the feeling is too deep for sound. Ashton sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't open her eyes right away. When she did, she looked at him, not at the blazer, not at the card in his hand, not at anything except his face. And she said the only thing that mattered. Your mama heard that, baby. I know she did. Ashton took her hand. The swollen knuckles, the rough skin, the hand that had ironed 10,000 shirts so he could ride a bus to a school that never wanted him. He held it and said nothing, because nothing he could say would be enough. They sat there for a long time. The lobby emptied around them. Neither moved. The next morning, the video surfaced. A parent in the wings had recorded Gerald's confrontation with Ashton before the performance. Every word, every gesture, the laugh, the insult about staining the piano. She posted it that night. By morning, it had been shared 4,000 times. By afternoon, it was on the local news. By evening, the hashtag Let Him Play was trending in Chicago. The Board of Trustees called an emergency session within the week. Gerald Thornton sat in a chair he had occupied for 14 years, across from the people who had once deferred to his every word, and heard a sentence he never imagined hearing. We think it's time for new leadership. He was not fired. He was allowed to resign. The distinction mattered deeply to him. It mattered to no one else. 3 generations of Thorntons at Hargrove Academy, ended not by scandal, not by politics, but by an 18-year-old boy who sat down at a piano and played the truth so loudly that the lies couldn't survive it. The following Monday, Preston Thornton found Ashton in the music room after school. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking nothing like his father. "Can I sit in?" he asked quietly. "I want to learn how you do that." Ashton looked at him, studied his face, searching for the smirk, the angle, the inheritance. He found none. "Pull up a chair," Ashton said. It was the first genuine bridge built inside those walls, and it wouldn't be the last. Here's what I keep thinking about. That piano didn't ask who was sitting at it. It didn't check his zip code. It didn't glance at his shoes or the color of his skin or the neighborhood he rode the bus from every morning. It just responded, the way music always does, to the truth in the hands that touched it. Gerald Thornton spent 14 years deciding who belonged at that bench. He built walls out of politeness. He turned silence into a weapon. He controlled every door, every opportunity, and convinced himself the system he inherited was the one he deserved. And then one night, an 18-year-old boy sat down, played 11 minutes of Chopin, and every wall came down. Not because Ashton was angry. Not because he shouted or made demands, but because he did something simpler and harder. He showed them what they had been refusing to see. He let the music tell the truth about who he was, where he came from, and what he carried inside him every day he walked through those halls like a ghost. Talent doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for an invitation. It doesn't care about your last name, your tax bracket, or which entrance you're told to use. It just exists, quietly, stubbornly, sometimes invisibly, until someone is brave enough or desperate enough to let it out. Doris Blake knew that. Every morning at 4:30, standing at an ironing board before dawn, listening to Chopin on a clock radio, pressing creases into shirts for people who would never learn her name. She bet everything, her body, her savings, her faith, on a boy and a sound, and the belief that the world would eventually have no choice but to listen. Elaine Calloway knew that. She heard it through the floorboards of a church basement and spent 6 years building a stage for someone else because her own had been taken away. She never asked for credit. She just showed up and poured everything she had into a pair of hands the world wasn't watching. The world is full of Ashtons, kids with the gift without the platform, people with the talent without the door. And for everyone who finds a broken piano in a dusty church basement, 100 never do. That's not their failure. That's ours.